Shazam. It's not that bad.
Alpha Critic.
Look, I might not have as much experience as you because I'm not super old like you, but I've seen all of the Fast and the Furious movies, lady. It's all about family.
Shazam is not a film that will go down in history as a great classic. It's not going to be distributed in the Criterion Collection. But Shazam was not made for that purpose. Shazam is a kid's film, and as such, it should be judged as a kid's film. And if we look at Shazam through that lens, Shazam really isn't that bad. So why did it fail? Well, I can break this film down in a myriad of ways. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that just because a film is made for kids that this justifies poor quality in any stage of development. And there are plenty of mistakes in this film. But at the end of the day, the real reason that Shazam bombed at the box office was because the producers of Shazam never really considered the audience they were targeting. In the early days of the comic book that would eventually become Shazam, the superhero character was called Captain Marvel. Now, obviously, there is a Captain Marvel in the Marvel universe, so the DC Captain Marvel was renamed Shazam. But in the old comic book days, Captain Marvel did not act like a kid. He acted more like Superman. His alter ego was the child Billy Batson, but when he turned into Shazam, he tended to act like an adult.
I'll not only tell you how, I'll show you how it's done. Shazam!
Now I'll give a demonstration. I'm going to show you how you've been misled by an imposter. Justice will be done to him. He committed many crimes in his own country, and he'll be returned there for punishment.
In the recent movies, they changed this. The grown man superhero acts a little childish. He acts a little silly. He acts a little immature. I actually think that this is done very well by Zachary Levi, who they hired to play Shazam. One thing that has always bothered me about these movies, though, both the first movie and the sequel, is that the boy they hired to play Billy Batson does not act like a child at all. He doesn't act silly. He doesn't act immature. He doesn't act childish. Like most young actors hired by Hollywood casting directors, producers, and film directors, the kid that they got to play Billy Batson acts very mature. He acts like a little adult. So when you have this very mature young boy, he turns into an adult superhero who acts like a kid, it doesn't really work. It doesn't make any sense. So although I don't have anything against that actor, since they were going with Zachary Levi, who was obviously a very good choice for this role, they really should have hired a different actor to play the kid. This is a perfect illustration of the lack of thoughtfulness in producing this project. And that also goes for the original Shazam movie, the first one. But the real reason I bring this up is to point out the kid-like nature of Zachary Levi's performance. Some of the jokes are maybe just a little too silly. It may have been a little too childish. But you can kind of forgive that if they're trying to appeal to small children. They're trying to make a film that's fun for the whole family. They're trying to make a film that a 4-year-old could enjoy. I understand that. I appreciate that. And because of that, I can forgive them for introducing some moments and some jokes that I find a little too silly. But here's the thing. They also include quite a bit of violence. There's one scene in which the beloved principal of the school, I think he's the principal, has a spell cast on him and he walks off the side of a roof and kills himself. That's not a film for a 4-year-old. That's not a film for a 5-year-old. That's more like a film for a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, maybe even older than that. I don't know. It depends on your family, right? Family! I don't have any kids of my own, so I'm not a great judge, but I do have nieces and nephews, and I would not recommend this film for any of my nieces or nephews. And that's just because of the violence alone. They also include a homosexual subplot for one of the children in the film.
Guys, this is no time for secrets, okay? We have to tell them the truth. We're superheroes!
I'm gay.
Now, if you're watching this and you lean left politically, you will probably hear that and you'll think, well, homosexual children do exist. They sometimes feel vulnerable and scared and marginalized, and so it's a good thing that Hollywood is presenting them in a film for kids. Because you know what? Such children watching this film, they will feel included, and other kids watching the film will feel less likely to bully them. And I understand that thinking. I'm sympathetic to that. However, if you want to make a family-friendly film, and if you want that film to be successful in America, you're going to have to recognize that a lot of parents are going to disagree with this perspective. Many parents are going to see this as some kind of indoctrination to left-wing political ideology at a young age. And yeah, maybe producers of children's films in Hollywood will disagree with that, but if they want parents to feel comfortable taking their children to a Hollywood movie aimed at their kids, conservative parents need to know that Hollywood isn't going to be preaching leftist political values to their kids. It's critical to stay politically neutral when making children's films. Shazam failed to do this, and it's not just that they made a child homosexual. They are having the child look at a picture of a half-naked guy in a magazine.
I'm really starting to see the appeal.
Even if you want to make the argument that it's totally appropriate to feature a homosexual child in a children's film, which I totally disagree with, you have to understand that featuring a child ogling at a half-naked man in a magazine is going way too far. So it's really not a surprise that the film didn't do well, because of course every conservative parent that goes to this film will be disgusted by that scene, and they will tell their neighbors about that scene, and they will tell their friends at church about that scene, and they will tell their siblings about that scene. And just like the word-of-mouth marketing that helps films when a film is great, this kind of word-of-mouth disappointment in a film is going to kill a film at the box office, naturally. This is a quintessential example of get woke, go broke. Now, I've read reviews about this film, and a lot of reviews say that it's terrible, that the production value is shoddy, and that the special effects are bad. But I didn't really think any of that was true. When you're writing a film for children, you can kind of get away with some things that you can't get away with when you're writing a film for adults. Now, again, I want to reiterate that I don't believe that poor quality at any level is justified simply because you're making a film for kids. I just reviewed Goonies from the 1980s for my radio show, Make Movies Great Again, with Sebastian Gorka. And we had a special guest, actually. We had Robert Davi come on, who plays one of the villains in Goonies. And it was honestly one of the best shows we've ever done. So if you want to see that, go to Rumble, look for Make Movies Great Again, Sebastian Gorka, Goonies, and you'll find that it's actually it's a lot of fun to watch. Highly recommend it. All right, so yeah, don't just make a film crappy because it's for kids. Obviously, you can't do that. However, when it comes to things like cliches, you can kind of get away with a lot more in a kid's film, simply because young kids will not have been introduced to many of the tropes that an adult audience would be familiar with, right? And so, including a cliche can be okay in a kid's film. You can copy things from other films pretty blatantly, and you can get away with it. And that's not always true for films that are made for adults. Now, before making this video, I watched a breakdown of Shazam from one of my favorite YouTubers, Filmento. Now, I agree with this guy about 90% of the time. But on this occasion, I didn't really agree with him that much at all. His primary criticism of the film was that the writers wrote this script very generically. They stole scenes from other movies, the plot line seemed very movie-like, and it seemed to exist in the movie world, and there was nothing original. It didn't stem from reality in any way whatsoever. And although all of that is true, that doesn't necessarily make a film bad. There are lots of films that steal from other films and that don't really stem from reality, and there's a lot of films that are very movie-like, and they're still good films, some of them are still good films. Pulp Fiction is a perfect example of this, but Pulp Fiction is unique because Quentin Tarantino has an unusual way of writing dialogue. The cinematography was very good, the acting was fantastic, the soundtrack was unique and interesting and catchy, and Tarantino presented the story with a messed up chronological order. So Quentin Tarantino could get away with stealing scenes from other films, placing the world of his story in a very movie-like setting, and not taking care to make sure that everything made perfect sense. None of that really mattered because he did everything with style and a high level of quality. And like I said, if a child hasn't seen the films that have inspired the scenes that they're watching in this children's film, they're never going to know that it was inspired by those scenes in the first place. They're not going to care about any of that. They're just going to think what they're watching on screen is cool. So I don't really think that any of these criticisms are all that significant. They're all valid. I just don't think that these are the reasons that this film failed. Now, Filmento does make one really good point. He asks the question, what is the motivation of the villains? The villains in this film consist of 3 ancient witches. Now, these witches are sisters, and they're all of different races, which doesn't make any sense, but this is Hollywood. Of course they're going to do that. Anyway, these 3 witches, as it turns out, are the daughters of some kind of very powerful god, or something like that. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, at some point, this god was killed, and he lost all of his powers, and these powers were transferred to Shazam. And so now these witches are back, and they want to take the power away from Shazam, and they want to use it themselves. However, Filmento asks, why do these witches want Shazam's power when they clearly have a massive amount of power already? And I think that we assume while watching the film that there is some benefit to them getting the power from Shazam. So, yeah, I don't think the fact that they already have a lot of superpowers would necessarily preclude them from a desire to attain these other powers as well. However, his question does raise a very good point. It's critical in any film, whether it's for adults or kids, to make the intentions of the villain clear. We need to know the motivations behind the villains. This is especially true in a sequel like this Shazam movie, because we've already seen the hero's story, so his story has already been told. Now we need someone else to have a story in order to push the action forward in this movie. We need there to be a story for our hero to react to. And if that story is not clear, we're going to be confused about what's going on in the film the whole time. And that was definitely true with me. Now, I don't know if the writer had some kind of an idea about why these women wanted the power of Shazam or what they would do with this power after they got it, but whatever those answers are, they were never expressed in the film. We never knew why these women were doing anything that they were doing. Now, there were a lot of other details that I would have changed had I made this film, and many of the complaints I saw expressed on the Filmento YouTube channel, like I said, I do agree with, but I just don't think that any of these problems are why the film failed. I think that the reason the film failed is because they made a film that was too violent and too vulgar for little kids, but was way too silly for older kids. And so it just comes down to being a film without any audience. And I know a lot of adults that go out and they watch these children's films, but even those people probably aren't going to like this film that much because it's just not the most sophisticated script in the world. Now, I think that if I could present one detail that I think condemned this film, it was overcomplication. At the end of the first film, Shazam gives his power to all of his siblings. He's in foster care, and he's got a bunch of foster siblings. And at the end of the film, all the siblings become Shazam superheroes. Now, I didn't think that this was a smart thing to do in the first movie. And at the beginning of the second movie, I immediately realized that this is going to be a problem because this is supposed to be Shazam movie. It's not Shazam, the Shazam family movie. It's just about the one character. So how do you get rid of all the other Shazam characters? Now, in this film, they do make most of the other siblings less interested in crime fighting than our main character, Billy Batson, and I think that this works. But I don't think they went far enough with this idea. I was looking for the moment that the filmmakers were going to strip all the other characters of their superpowers so that it would simply be a film about Zachary Levi, about Billy Batson. But they never did that, and so we had like 10,000 characters that you had to follow the story arcs of. I mean, I exaggerate, of course, but you get the idea. I don't even remember how many siblings there are, but it's like, I think there's like 6 kids, and then they've got their parents, and then they've got the school principal, and then you have like 3 villains, which, I mean, you've already got all these kids plus their parents, and why don't you just create one villain? Why create 3? Now you got 3 more characters that you have to flesh out personalities for, and you got to give each of them their own story arc, and I don't know. This number of characters is impossible to follow. It just makes the entire film convoluted and messy. Now, what they could have done was create some kind of feature to the superpowers, like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And perhaps in the interim between the first movie and the second movie, the kids have started to notice that their powers have weakened because none of them enjoy crime fighting except for Billy Batson. Billy Batson still has his full superpowers, but maybe some of the other kids have noticed that their powers have diminished, and maybe a couple of kids have even lost their superpowers completely. And what's even more surprising, perhaps, is that they don't even mind.
Oh, I love these daily recaps. I just gotta spread my wings a bit before dinner.
What is happening? What is happening right now? All or none, guys. If you say you have to work,
I have to work.
They never asked for these powers, and to be honest, they were happy to lose them. So now, Billy Batson is once again the only Shazam. He's got to go out and fight the bad guys alone. Then, maybe at the end of the movie, when Billy Batson is at his low point, he's, fighting the villain, and he's losing. He's at his wit's end. We don't know what's going to happen. It looks like maybe this is the end for Shazam. He doesn't know what to do. Then suddenly, one of his siblings shows up. Their powers fully intact. Then another. Soon all the siblings are there, all their powers intact. He looks at them and he says, I thought you guys lost your powers. What happened? Well, they say, we didn't have a reason to fight before, but you're our brother, and we'll always fight for you. And then, blam, 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 they fight the villain together, and of course, they win because the love of their family brought back their superpowers. What an emotional ending. What a beautiful moment. The crowd loves it. The people in the theater are cheering, and mom and dad go home and they're talking to their neighbors the next day and they're saying, oh yeah, we saw the Shazam movie. It was great. It was fantastic. You're going to love it. You got to take your kids to see that one. Oh, that's great. Thanks. We'll go tomorrow. And then the movie ends up a box office hit. Why? Because they didn't add any gay stuff. It was just heartwarming and a brilliantly told film. The violence was tame. It wasn't too scary. The jokes weren't too silly. And it really was fun for the whole family. Unfortunately, this is not what they did with the film. And I feel bad for Zachary Levi. I think he's underrated. I think he was great in this film. I do hope they make a third one. And I hope they make it well for his sake. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Until next time, guys, Shazam!
The day isn't over yet.